expand. So that's it. Everywhere in the tree, there are no Chinese wolves close to living dog sequences. There are no Middle Eastern wolves. They're all European wolves or dogs. And we only are left to conclude that dogs have a European origin about 20,000 years ago. Also, in these mitochondrial DNA sequences, because they evolve quickly, we can begin to see the sequence of expansion beginning about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago when human populations expanded as well. Okay, let's move on to traits. This is my fondness for dogs. I don't own a dog, but I love their diversity. And this just shows from an old American Museum pamphlet the notion they just are so diverse that we can't really maybe count them from even a single wolf population. I love them because they're a model for diversification and the constraints on diversification, morphologic, anatomical constraints. And my first work focused on, as was mentioned earlier, juvenilization. And this juvenilization is sort of uniform among many different dog breeds. And you can imagine we like it in the sense that we've selected it because we love things that are puppy-like, and keeping this conformation into adults might have been helpful or desirable, and might have gone along with behavioral suites as well. My main point actually in looking at dogs first was it was perhaps this kind of great difference between puppy and adult dogs in morphology that drove some of this diversification in domestic dogs. We don't have the same kind of difference, say, between kittens and adult cats. I have cats. They all basically look the same in terms of cranial conformation. But dogs are vastly different because if we truncate this growth process or speed it up, that is, keep the juvenile rate into adulthood, we can manufacture very dramatically different kinds of brainial conformation. Although I like this explanation, it wasn't satisfying without understanding the genetic basis, and that's why soon after my PhD I just focused on molecular genetics. All right, so let's talk about that, the genetics of these traits. What kind of insight does that provide us? There are really two dominant mechanisms for building a new dog. First is you cross two individuals, they look the same, in this case identical, and then you find in your litter an unusual individual. And then you back-cross individuals from the litter and you fix that morphology. Darwin called these sports. Well, they're mutants. He didn't know anything about genetics, and they're quite common in domestic dogs, and we feel explain the origin of many breeds. This kind of selection for weirdness, for novelty, is something maybe that uniquely humans do and differentiate dogs from all the domesticated animals. Well, Darwin loved dogs, of course, and went around the countryside making inquiries of breeders, asking them how they did their thing. And he came up with the idea that dogs were a good analog for natural selection. It's kind of artificial selection, and notioned the idea that there's progressive selection in many dog breeds. So that's the other mechanism. What we discovered in analyzing genetics of dogs is that basically all this variability is due to just a few characters, just a few genetic traits, just a few genes. And this is very different from the case in other domestic animals. A gene called IGF-1, for instance, is responsible for more than 50% of the variation in body size in dogs. If we look at humans, 40 genes that affect body height only explain 5% of the variation. So dogs are very different in this way. So this is all summarized, in a sense, in this plot, which is a genetic similarity plot of domestic dogs. And what discovers from that plot is wolves are ancestral to domestic dogs. There's some ancient breeds, and that there are many breeds that breeders have classified according to function or phenotype: sighthounds, spaniels, herding dogs. They all share a lot of genetic similarity. The outlier here are, say, toy breeds, where each of the breeds owes their origin to a different genetic lineage. So what we hypothesize is there's two processes going on in domestic dogs. The first is breeding like with like. So we want to make a better sighthound. Well, we take another sighthound, it's already a distinct breed, interbreed them, and we come up in the end over time with collectively a group that's genetically related but expresses this phenotypic trait that sighthounds have. The other process is discrete mutations, like these sports. Once these sports appear, then they're shopped around all dogdom on different genetic backgrounds, giving the appearance of diversity, but actually its genetic toolkit is very narrow. And we tried to test this idea looking at historical records and verified the fact that at least toy breeds or dwarfism comes from a cross between a toy breed and a distinct breed. And this, to end, this is just the process of evolution going on in domestic dogs. It's actually much more simple than we had envisioned. It relies, unlike other species, on sports. That process began in the Victorian era with the focus on novelty rather than function. And who knows where we're going next? I kind of think that this is an interesting future, this sort of research. This is a contest that was put up by a dog company. And I can't tell the difference between some of these dogs.